Welcome to the Honoring Life podcast, sponsored by Cornerstone Funerals, where we explore the heart of afterlife care, from personal stories to practical guidance. Join us for insightful conversations with experts like death doulas, funeral celebrants, and palliative care specialists. Together, we'll demystify the journey, inspire new perspectives, and celebrate how we honor life's final chapter. Let's make the conversation about end-of-life care more compassionate, informed, and empowering. Join us now on today's journey into the world of end-of-life care.
Alrighty, so welcome everyone to this episode, actually our very first episode of Honoring Life podcast. Now, the purpose of this podcast is really to entertain but also educate people who are coming towards the end of their life, or preparing for it, or caring for a loved one who is at this phase. Now, end of life is a normal transition. It is part of life. So we're helping to break down some of these barriers of understanding, or some of the fears and the myths, really, so that people can choose more consciously or very much empowered choices, because they're more informed of what can and possibly will happen. So with us today, a very brave lady being our first one, is Jacqui Williams. Now, Jacqui is a fantastic end-of-life doula. She's been doing this for a very long time in different capacities. So I'm just going to read her bio from her website. So please do go to her website, which is endoflifetransitions.com.au, and you can see and read so much more about her. But basically, Jacqui says that throughout her years, she's directly cared for the dying, supported grieving families and friends, and she's written and presented life stories and ceremonies. She's had the privilege of meeting the most remarkable people, and all who have been anything but ordinary. And it was with this big background and passion that she decided to start the business of end-of-life transitions. So after spending many years as a health professional working aged and palliative care, it was in the community hospital healthcare teams providing clinical expertise for the end of life and the significant periods of time when dying person, their loved ones, are having to negotiate really by themselves this process, this transitional phase, and often feeling quite alone and daunted at sometimes, and understandably scared. So whether the person lived at home or was in hospital in the residential care facility, Jacqui was experienced enough to, and with enough close family members or friends also transitioning. So with all this compassion, understanding and wisdom, has really done a wonderful service to the community. So she also knows extreme pain, so it gives a lot of empathy and compassion for this process. And for people who are going through transitions at this phase, I can speak from my own experience, it can be very overwhelming and confusing, and it's just like, what now, or what do we do? And having someone to really lean into, and with experience, compassion, empathy, full understanding with the clinical and also personal side of it, can be invaluable in just saying you're being normal and it's okay that you're feeling these things, and this is what can be done. So I'm going to hand over now to Jacqui, and with a big opening question of how are you, and also please share the real side of this story and why you are doing this and what doulas do.
Yeah, thanks, Lee. Thanks for the invitation. Look, firstly, probably start at the very beginning, and the basics is that an end-of-life doula, the word doula means, originally it's a Greek word that means slave. And in modern iteration, we say it's a person who serves. Mm-hmm. So whilst traditionally it's largely been females across the world that have become or are end-of-life doulas, it's any gender can be an end-of-life doula. Some people, I just want to explain, some communities call end-of-life doulas, death midwife, death walkers, end-of-life companion, but across Australia most of us are known as end-of-life doulas, and part of the reason for that is a doula can support our community from well people that are not living with a life-limiting condition, all the way to someone who might have early or advanced life-limiting condition, to those actively dying, the deceased and the bereaved. So
So you've actually frozen, Jacqui.
Family and friends. What we do is we meet a community need by often meeting, complementing the gaps. So a doula provides emotional, practical, social, spiritual, and often advocacy support. And we're not defined by Monday to Friday, 9 to 5. Many of us are available across 7 days a week, and we can be engaged privately, or people can use aged care funding or disability funding sometimes to engage our services. And we can visit people in their own homes, in a residential aged care facility, in a hospital or a hospice. Also, people don't know that obviously a doula can provide in-person support and guidance, but we can also be engaged via Zoom. I've got a number of families who are either busy in life and they're with working and they can't always be available, so they choose to Zoom or do an online connection, or they might live geographically dispersed, or they might live even nationally or internationally, and they choose to engage a doula to support them or their person living with a life-limiting illness. So we can do in-person, Zoom, we can respond by email and phone, and it complements the health professional role. So probably just the other thing I'd like to add in is that in describing the doula role, it's a non-medical role, so it's not replacing doctors. It's a non-nursing role, not replacing those nurses. It's a non-allied health role, and what I mean by that is we're not a social worker, we're not a dietitian or physio or speech therapist, etc. And I even go on and tell people in the community that we're a non-support worker or non-personal care workers. So we're not there to shower someone, to do domestics, to make meals, to do shopping for them. So yeah, go on, Lee. Yep.
It sounds like it's a very comprehensive role, and the flexibility that's built into the structure of the doula is so that there's so many different ways that you can support the person, as you've said. But it sounds very much, because you're not medical, you're not nursing, you're not social work, you're not all these things. Is it possible to, or accurate enough to make the assumption that you're like not quite a grief counsellor, because you're saying you're not a support person medically. So how does that really fit in? Like I'll be honest, I'm struggling then. How would I label if I was to engage someone with your skills? And I now feel apprehensive going, well, what would I get you to do?
Yeah, no, good point. Maybe if I give some examples, that might help. So some of the clients that a doula can support and the ones that I've supported, a daughter from interstate was very close to her mother, but obviously lived interstate. Her mother had a life-limiting condition. She had a chronic advanced respiratory lung disease, and her mum lived alone. And so mum was finding it really challenging. She had lots of different service providers involved. She was in the under aged care funding, and mum actually felt that she wanted to die at home, but she needed some help with coordinating conversations between her GP and also with the other service providers, because whilst she had a number of service providers involved, none of them were talking to each other.
Oh, yes, that's so common too.
Yeah, so the daughter wanted me to spend time with her mother, also to help with service navigation. It was with this particular client, she was on oxygen all the time, and she found it very hard to get to her doctor. So one of the things that she wanted a coordination of care. So she was very, very lucid and very independent mentally, and she wanted some support. So she would actually get service providers on the phone call and she would have them on speaker, and I'd be sitting next to her, and we would have conversations in getting her plan of care and how she could stay at home for as long as possible with quality. And she just needed someone to advocate for her. So in those conversations, I always get the client to lead the conversation because it's their life. They're the masters of knowing what they want. But with their permission, before we get on the phone call, I always say, what are the things you would like to concentrate on this discussion? But also, what are the things you allow me to do? So if I hear something that I think needs further clarity, or a question maybe you haven't asked, are you happy for me to be your voice just for that moment? And this client, and I haven't had any clients say no when I've posed that to them. So part of that was just fine tuning and connecting her organisation so it wasn't so disorganised. And the other big part for her was she was passionate. She'd done a lot of reading. She'd heard that there was this thing called community palliative care, and yet her GP had been reticent to make a referral to community palliative care.
Yeah, I hear that too.
Yeah, so one of the things she did was all those things I said was we got the doc. She made a telehealth appointment with her doctor, and she wanted me. She said, "Come sit next to me on the bed, Jacqui." And so on speakerphone, she again engaged and had a conversation with the doctor, and I could gently say, "This is what's happening to this client in her own home. She's had a recent fall. She's incontinent. She can't do this. She can do this." This is where the community palliative care can assist her. Anyway, by the end of that conversation, the doctor who was reticent to make that referral did make a referral to community palliative care. The first visit the community palliative care did with the nurses coming out, again, the client wanted me there, so I was with her when they came, added any little extra clarification questions or additional questions on her behalf. But once the palliative care became involved, then I moved into a different direction. And then the client wanted me to sit with her so she could reminisce about her life, but also plan her funeral. So not all doulas are funeral celebrants, but I'm also a funeral celebrant. So it's a lovely synergy to have clients, and I'm getting more of them in life who want to co-craft what their funeral or memorial will be before they die. We co-craft it, and then they are very kind. They let me officiate it after they die. So that was one person. I'm happy to give another example if that helps clarify the role even further.
I loved how you said, in the initial part, you said it's about the advocacy and listening to, in this case, your clients' wishes, wants, and desires, and helping them have a voice. And I think you explained that beautifully in that example where you took the back foot, but you also led as needed with permission. So the client is very much in control, and this person obviously had done their research, was very familiar and comfortable to take the conversation. And you were just there, the backstop, and saying, yep, you can do this. And how about this? And how about that? Do you find then also when you're talking with other medical professionals, that because you are trained, that you have a little bit more respect, or because my parents are at this phase of life too, the transition phase, and I'm finding it frustrating that even though I've got permission from them to have a voice on their behalf and with them, that the doctors are sometimes quite reluctant to be engaged. So I'm just curious, sometimes having a doula or another person who's medically trained, or at least in the system understanding, does that give them a lot more weight and a bit more assurance from the client's point of view that you can be the advocate, and do then the medical profession respect that a little bit easier too?
Look, I just need to clarify that, good questions. I need to clarify that end-of-life doulas do not have to you don't have to have a health professional background to be an awesome end-of-life doula. I just happen to come with a registered nursing background, but I'm not a registered nurse anymore. It complements some of the stuff that a doula does, but you can the attributes of being a doula are couple of the key attributes that I think is authenticity. So one of the things that I get asked quite often is, if I engage your services as a doula, Jacqui, what happens if you're sick? What happens if you go on leave, etc.? So we're building what we call doula hubs across Australia, where we are connecting with other doulas so that if we get a client and circumstances change for ourselves that we can't always be present, then we can introduce another doula with permission to that client and their family. The other thing is also there may be different skills. There's situations where, for example, there was a client who contacted me, a wife of a gentleman who had early onset dementia, and she lived on the other side of Brisbane, and also with her particular needs and her husband's particular needs, I knew of a doula that lived in that area who also had some background in dementia support. And so I recommended, would she like to connect with someone more locally who's got dementia background as well? And so it's being authentic and saying, I can't be everything for everyone. Yes. But and I'll be honest and upfront with people about what I can bring, what I don't do, or whether I think there's someone else that needs to be involved. So if I think someone may benefit by a referral to palliative care, community palliative care, like that lady, then I'm going to encourage that, and I'm not going to pretend to be the palliative care community services, because I'm not. That's not what I am. It's all about teamwork and connection with your community in a broad sense. So that's the formal health professionals, plus the informal, which is family, friends, work colleagues, faith and cultural organisations, businesses, schools, doulas. The other attributes I want to just mention quickly are heart-centred. It's a very heart-centred role. That does not mean that health professionals aren't heart-centred, because they are. Yeah. The majority of them are. But what it is we're not defined by that 9 to 5 and also the strict policies and procedures. So we can basically sit with people to have some of those really important but challenging conversations that a health professional may not have time to do because of their organisational structure, their funding, their policy parameters. You think of a residential aged care facility and the amount of staffing ratio to residents. What capacity have they got to sit with someone to have these conversations, or even be with the dying person? Very limited because of the staffing ratios. It doesn't mean they don't want to be there. Just means their organisation's not necessarily funded or set up for it. Doulas are compassionate. We're person-centred, so it's not just about the individual who is well, maybe proactively planning and having advanced care planning discussions and conversations, but also with, as I said, the person with a life-limiting illness, but also for their family and friends. And we have to have a considerable amount of death comfortability. So we have to be in touch with the reality of our own mortality so that we can support others as they explore and discuss, their death comfortability, so to speak, and their grief and loss comfortability. And most importantly, the doulas have to be excellent listeners. We are not driven by time constraints. Silence is gold sometimes, just to sit with people in silence, to encourage them to share their stories, because that's how we make meaning and purpose of our lives, is storytelling and sharing. And to know that we've got 2 ears for a reason and 1 mouth for a reason, and we need to be deep listeners. So I wouldn't mind sharing another example that might help explain the doula role as well, if that's okay.
Yeah, can I just say, it sounds very much from my perspective at this moment, you become, don't hold me to this word as a definition, but more like a friend, a person who's there, but not engaged as emotionally involved as a family person, and certainly not emotionally involved as a real friend. So it sounds like a trusted. This is where I'm struggling to define it in my own head from what you're saying. I love what you're saying, but because we like boxes, we like labels generally, it's like a trusted friend without the emotional attachment to that
Yeah. And some people, I had one particular client comes to mind, and when she lived alone. She engaged my services very frequently, and she wanted someone to sit with her as a companion, to
That's
reminisce
the
on
word I wanted.
stories.
Companion, a trusted companion. So,
Because a lot of the families are complex these days. I mean,
yes.
they're geographically dispersed, they're time poor, sometimes they're blended or they're complex, estranged families. So there's a lot of layers to people's lives these days. And this particular lady she had advanced kidney disease, and she wanted me to actually physically take her to the GP twice and take her to her kidney specialist once, so that she could lead the conversations about her health and the management plan of what she was what that's going to look like going into the future. Hemodialysis, no hemodialysis, end stage palliative care, voluntary assisted dying. And she broached that subject, not me, voluntary assisted dying, and because I'm not allowed to do that in Queensland, and basically she has to initiate it. She wanted me there when she had those important conversations with the doctors, and she would introduce me not as her doula, but she said, "Oh, this is Jacqui, my end-of-life companion," and
Great.
but it allowed her to have the confidence to actually not only have those conversations, but know that I would, because I had her permission, to add and clarify on her behalf while we were there. And then afterwards, we would go back to her place. And then over a cup of tea and coffee, I'd say, "How was that for you? Talk to me about how that went for you. If you got it, did it raise any more questions, or did it clarify, or whatever?" And so we could connect that way. So often it's about building that rapport. Trust is a really good word that you
Yes.
used. And also initiating conversations, sometimes often with families, where there might be a bit of pushback. So, for example, the person themselves might want to talk about what they do want, and just as importantly, what they don't want,
Yeah.
should they get so sick they can't communicate their own healthcare wishes. But they might be getting pushback from their family or their partner or their spouse who doesn't want to talk about that.
Yeah.
So I have a number of clients that I am the neutral but proactive neutral, not a complacent neutral, but a proactive neutral person that sits around and engages and connects people who want to have those conversations with people that may be challenged by those conversations, or may feel a bit uncomfortable by them, or not, or be fearful and not know how to talk about it. And so I have clients that engage my services, where one particular client comes to mind. Last year, she engaged my services for 7 months. And over the kitchen table, she was extraordinarily comfortable with the reality of her own mortality. She knew she was dying. She knew that she was very comfortable with her spirituality and what happened, what she believes happened after she dies. But her family weren't quite in the same place, and she just wanted to open up that conversation, but all to find out what was concerning them, what was their fears, what did they want, but also to give her an opportunity where the doula is supporting her and the family, but supporting those conversations so she could feel comfortable to say, "This is how I'm feeling. I want you to know because this is really important to me." So part of that lady also ended up wanting to leave a bit of a legacy. And so I introduced her to something called the 5-minute legacy love letters. And it's just a bit of a tool that you can use to writing a letter as if it's the last correspondence you're having with the chosen person you're giving that letter to. And she chose to do her letters to her grandchildren. And she wanted to leave a little bit of her flavour, to tell her grandchildren what they meant to her and also what she wished for them in life. And so I came back a few weeks later and she was beaming, and I said, "Big smile there. Why are you smiling like that?" She said, "Because I finished writing my legacy love letters to my grandchildren." And then we sort of, she took a pause when I asked the question, "So are you going to gift those letters to your grandchildren while you're alive?" or do you want to gift it to them after you have died? And she paused and thought for a moment, and she said, I'd like to give it to them after I'm died because I know they're really going to be sad and miss me. But she was so excited that she had written those letters and left a little bit of her legacy, a little bit of her wishes for her grandchildren. And the other thing she did as well was that she would email me in between our visits and just let me know how she was and if she was worried about anything. But also she wanted me to plan her funeral for her. And so right up to the last she chose to die in a palliative care unit here in Brisbane because her husband wasn't comfortable with her dying physically at home, and she was okay with that. So while she was well enough, she visited that palliative care unit and she made sure that she was comfy. Anyway, the long and short is the last 4 days of her life she spent in that unit, and a couple of those days I visited her, and we fine-tuned her funeral. And we talked about a lot of really deep things that were important to her. And we held hands with her permission. I sat there in the room with her, just her and I, doors shut, holding hands. And it was just a beautiful opportunity for learning for me, because I learn from everyone I meet.
Yes.
But also it gave her the opportunity to have some of these deep thoughts and conversations just privately with someone that was there to be a companion, I guess, in her final days.
Yeah.
And she was well supported by her family. It wasn't that. She just wanted that space.
Do you find then in that case that people find it easy to come to terms with their mortality, that as they're getting closer, I can only imagine, I've never been in that position firsthand yet, not fully anyway, but it's like, we know we're going to die, we know it's a fact of life. We know that some people are totally in denial until it happens. Some people are sort of aware of it and they sort of adjust, especially as diagnosis or treatment changes. Do you find them by just sitting there, it helps them to come to a level of acceptance easier and faster?
Not everyone reaches that point, but what it does is it gives people an opportunity to talk about some of their fears, some of their joys, some of the things they've achieved in life, what they think might happen after they die. It's not about what Jacqui believes, it's about what they believe, and giving them an opportunity to have a reflection, a thought, a conversation that's not going to be judged.
Yeah.
So for some people, definitely it's a bit of a light bulb moment where, they feel much more comfortable and relieved that they've done that. One of the ways that they do that is not just having these conversations by that is a big thing, but also in completing their legal documentation, their advanced care health directive, doing their legal documentation that gives them peace of mind that in writing they've put down what life prolonging treatments they do and don't want, what they value most, even to a point of, funeral, final body disposition. What are my wishes? Flame cremation, traditional burial, water cremation, whatever. So they, but it gives them that opportunity to put their affairs in order, so to speak. So I always say to families and clients and my own family, at a very minimum, tell the people that mean the most to you and the people that are going to make the decisions when you can no longer communicate your health wishes, tell them what's important to you while you are as well as you can be. And if your mind changes, if your thoughts change about what's important to you, tell them that as well. That's the minimum.
Yeah.
And then utopia is conversations and legal documentation. So who have you picked as your substitute decision maker? Your legal voice, should you lose the capacity to be able to voice your healthcare wishes, and what are your wishes? What do you value most? So there's a real movement of not just looking at those from a legal parameter, but looking at it from a quality of life.
Yes.
And your quality of life and what brings you quality life is as individual for you as it is to me. So whilst we might have some commonalities and themes, your life is your life, my life is my life. My death is my death and yours is your death.
Yes.
So, yeah.
And that can be quite tricky, as you said, different family dynamics, but also um, personal views. Like, again, coming back to my own experience, like I said, my parents are dying. So my perspectives of what should happen, and what they're telling me in return, I'm going, I'm really challenged by some of their choices or some of their reactions. And I can only guess if I had someone who was neutral enough not to get engaged on either side, so to speak, and just say, this is what I'm thinking and feeling, and going, okay, so how do you navigate that? How do you support both sides of the argument with different family members? Because it sounds like that's part of your role, as you mentioned, with that negotiation or mediation process. Yeah, that's just one of the tricks.
One of the biggest parts, well, we live in a mainstream Western society that's death phobic, first and foremost. So
Yeah,
even up the topic of death and dying and our mortality is challenging for a lot of people. But also, the fact is we need to be able to do some practical things. Information, knowledge is power. So
yeah,
what happens is people don't know what is palliative care. People don't know, because palliative care really is from diagnosis to last breath, or diagnosis to bereavement if you're family. So, but people think of it as just end of life, and that's one
yes,
component. But knowledge is power. So if we can give people the skills to feel more death comfortable, more death literate, so they've got skills and knowledge, then they can make informed choices. If they don't know what they don't know, so part of what a doula can do is help. If people want, they may not want it, and they might want a small amount of information or a big amount of information. Is if we can guide them as to where they can find that information, or we can source it for them, and then they know they can make a more informed choice. Because sometimes what we first say out of our mouth is what we want is
yeah,
based on a small amount of information that we've got, rather than knowing the most modern information, or the most, they might not even know where they can get services. Do they pay for services? The lady I spoke to you about earlier about the kidney disease, she was tossing up, do I have eventually go on hemodialysis on machine 3 times a week, a couple of hours each time for the rest of my life to stay alive? Or do I choose not to go on that machine, and then I know I will die over a certain amount of time? And then so we went to Kidney Health Australia, and we got information from the peak organisation
yes,
in kidney care, and she got some information from that and then made a decision. And her decision was still, no, I don't want hemodialysis, but she doesn't need it yet. When she gets to the point of needing it, she might change her mind and say, yes, I'm going to have hemodialysis, and that's okay. So
yeah,
part of the doula role is to help people navigate, to get more information if they want that. And where it gets complex is some members of the family might want that and some might not, and that's okay. It's just understanding that flow. But also telling people it's okay to change your mind. Um, you know, things change in our life. Our perspective and our values change in life. So because you say, I want this now or I don't want this now, doesn't mean down the track you don't want it down the track. So it's an interesting role.
oh, for sure.
And look, it's probably another one big change that I've seen over the last couple of years, because I've been doing this for over 6 years now, is carers. There's a lot of carer strain out there. So families, carers are largely families, but not always, but carer strain. So I've had one situation as an example to give you. A beautiful daughter was primary carer of a mother who was living with them, and very, very busy lifestyle that this daughter led. But the mum needed more help than what she could get at home, even on a level 4 aged care package, so the top aged care package. But mum was reticent to go into a nursing home or into a residential aged care. But the daughter and I had a number of engagements, and it was online rather than in person. And it was talking about, how do you have the conversations with your family member? How do you have that, so that in turning it around, instead of, well, if you want to go to a residential aged care, well, most people don't want to, but some people need to, is turning the language around and saying, we've got a 2-week trial in a residential aged care facility. I'm going to support you all the way in doing that, Mum. Let's see how it goes. We'll keep talking every day about that, and I'll be visiting you, and then we'll see how that goes for you, Mum. Anyway, the long and short is this family, the mother transitioned beautifully into a residential aged care, and well supported by the daughter. But what it did was it reclaimed the relationship that daughter and mother had. So instead of being carer and mother, it became daughter and mother again, which was really quite beautiful. And that's the thing, is sometimes for carers, so family members that become carers, their role gets so diluted.
Yes.
That might have been a husband or a wife or a daughter or a son or grandchild, and that gets diluted with the carer role, and they just want to resurrect that beautiful role that they had once before. So it was just all about language, service navigation, and that's some of the things that a doula can do, is just have those conversations and support that language. So sometimes my clients are carers, sometimes it's a client, sometimes it's a combo of both.
Yeah. So, and the other big message I'm hearing with that is it's like dissecting or unentangling the meshing that happens and making clarity, or helping facilitate clarity.
Yeah, so and that's all about 2 ears, 1 mouth sometimes, is the fact that I think sometimes life is so chaotic for most of us that we're not, we try to be good listeners, but often a lot of us aren't all that good at listening. We get distracted by mobile phones, about noises, about, people coming into rooms and stuff. And really, if you can just focus on the person and have deep listening, don't say it's going to be right when everything's going to be okay, when often it's not going to be okay, but give people an opportunity to have the conversations and sit in silence. Silence can be quite gold, as I said earlier. Being able to, there was this, and I'm learning that all the time. I'm not picture perfect. Some of my greatest learnings have been from my doula clients, and one of the things was listening to the lady who went to the palliative care unit, sitting there holding a hand and just saying, fine tuning her ceremony when she dies, her funeral ceremony. And I had on my phone her Spotify playlist for the funeral, for the songs. And I said, would you like to listen to them? She said, yes. So my default was in this dark room that she wanted semi-dark, holding a hand with her permission, listening to her music. My default was, oh, why do you like that music again? Tell me about that again. And then I realized very quickly, just zip it, Jacqui, zip it.
Yeah.
She just wanted to be in a zone with her music that took her to a place that is her place, not Jackie's world. And then after we played the music, we had the most rigorous, wonderful conversations. But I just, by default, sometimes you just go to talk, and you just got to pull it back, and just, be present. And the other one of my greatest learning is, don't procrastinate. You walk out the door, there's an assumption that older persons have got their affairs in order, their conversations, their documentation about advanced care planning. That's an assumption. A lot of people don't have that. And also it's an assumption that as a young person, you don't need that because you're young. But as you know, in your industry, you blink and things can change and life can be taken very quickly and people die. So I say don't procrastinate. And one of my biggest learnings was from a client who had motor neurones disease. And there were certain things that she was talking to me about what she wanted after she died. And she wanted to be cremated, and she wanted her ashes scattered on a lake that she had been able to swim in every day until her disease took over. But she hadn't told the important people in her life. She hadn't written anything down. And my assumption was that we were going to connect again. And instead of Jacqui writing on even a scrappy piece of paper right there and then with her in the room what her wishes were, that she could show the staff, because she was in residential aged care, or she could give to her important people when they visited later that week. I didn't do that on the assumption that I would visit her again, and I didn't for a myriad of reasons. She lived a long way away, and her health declined suddenly. So all the things she wanted after life, in her funeral, and her ceremony afterwards, it wasn't done. I heard after the effect, after she died, all the things she didn't want to happen happened.
Oh,
So my greatest learning was, even if it was on that piece of paper, I could have done it there and then. So don't
yeah,
procrastinate. We say
yeah,
we're going to get our affairs in order. We're going to do our documents before we die, and also a will. And a lot of people, 45% of Australian adults have not done a will. So, and I know that's after a person
yes,
dies, but that's just an example of a statistic of where we say we're going to do it, but we don't do it. So,
yeah.
yeah.
So very big lessons being shared, and I'm just looking at the time, just conscious of that. So some of the big take-home messages for me is silence is golden, allow things to be, but allow the conversations to flow, and with permission, navigate with the person being the leader and the doula is the support person, and maybe sometimes a prompt to go, well, this, am I getting this, am I hearing this correctly? Is this what you're saying? And then if they're inviting you to be part of the service navigation or even health management, you still encourage them to be the leader. And not all doulas have a clinical background, a medical background, but they can certainly be that compassionate companion to listen, to advocate as required with permission and within their scope of practice or experience. And they can ask questions that they may not have, that the client may not have thought of from a more social and of transitional phase, because you've heard other clients, other family experiences, other readings that with our own naivety may not even considered to be a possibility or reality. And so by presenting a different perspective, you can open up more conversations to gain more clarity and be more okay with where a person's at and where they're heading towards.
I think that's an excellent summary. I just want to add two things is when we look at a compassionate community that supports our persons who with a life-limiting illness, their informal carers and the bereaved, the public health movement says that death is not a medical event with a social component, but death is a social event with a medical component. So you mentioned the
Yeah.
word social, which I wanted to say. The other ways that doulas can help is do community education. So a lot of us go out and do community education to groups or organisations, death cafes, so social, organic, relaxed conversations about death and dying that are offered in the community. And just getting people more knowledgeable in those areas, and sometimes looking at rituals and ceremonies associated with end of life and afterlife care as well. But yeah, look, I think education's a big one in our role. I also want to just quickly mention there's a real movement that with voluntary assisted dying now that's legal in all states, and in Canberra next year, in November next year, and not Canberra, ACT, and also not yet in Northern Territory. But doulas are seen actively. I've had a number of clients who have been considering voluntary assisted dying, have been deemed eligible through the process that they have to go, but a doula can support them and their family before VAD is enacted. And I see a role of the doula too is after someone has enacted VAD, that they may have wanted some rituals or ceremony done after they've died as well. So I see that there's a real movement there where doula roles can support not only the health professionals involved with family and friends and the individual, but also have a role in that space as well.
And it's a beautiful experience. From my perspective, what I'm hearing and what I'm seeing in the industry is we are becoming more socially accepted around death. The conversations are starting to open up. We are being more proactive with compassionate ways of saying there's other ways that we can look at the transition. We need to start talking about it, and education is empowering. We make informed choices, we make comfortable choices, because we've broken down our own barriers in our own head and go, no, this is important to me. So thank you ever so much. I'm very mindful of the time, what you're going to next. Thank you for giving us your time this morning. It's especially on today. It's a very special experience for me, and also I'm sure all our listeners now. Is there any one gold nugget you'd like to share, or we'll just close it down?
I just want to thank you for the invite. I mean, I know the industry you're in, funeral industry, etc., but, you know, you're very proactive at Cornerstone Funerals to doing education. And like I said, knowledge is power. So, I mean, if we can educate our community to be more comfortable, you know, that's it's like a drip effect. It's like a ripple effect on the water. And so just thank you. Thanks for the opportunity to share a little bit about this role. I really appreciate it. And if people want to contact me, feel free to on endoflifetransitions.com.au.
Yes, and I'll put your information under the podcast information. But thank you ever again, Jacqui.
Thanks, Zoe.
Fantastic. As always, I'm not surprised we had such a good conversation. I'm figuring out how to turn this off. I'm just going to talk and then I'll cut it. I'll sniff it at the end. That was beautiful. Thank you ever so much. Seriously.
Oh, thank you. You asked such good questions, Lee, and you listened so well. You picked up what I thought was some really salient points there. So thank you. And thanks for the opportunity. It's nice to profile what doulas are doing out there.
And I think, again, because of education, we don't know. We hear of birth doulas and marriage celebrants and that sort of thing, but this is so, I think, more important because we are so taboo, we're so shut down on it.
Thank you for joining us on today's episode of Honoring Life. Our mission is to educate, inspire, and empower you to navigate and embrace the journey of afterlife care and memorialization. We hope these conversations provide clarity, comfort, and a sense of connection. You can learn more about today's guest in this episode's bio. And if you have questions or topics you'd like us to explore in the future, please contact Cornerstone Funerals at info@cornerstonefunerals.com.au. We value your feedback and look forward to continuing these important discussions together. If any of the information unsettles you, please contact your local mental health line, such as Lifeline, Grief Counseling, or Beyond Blue.